Hey guys, welcome back to Bible Fun with the Duns. Today we're studying Matthew chapter 2. Let's get started.
All right, Matthew chapter number 2 is part of the Christmas story that Luke doesn't include. So Luke is going to start with Mary's story. He's going to tell it from Mary's perspective, and it's going to talk about the birth, and it's going to talk about the shepherds. But Matthew is going to tell the story from Joseph's point of view. He's also going to look out maybe 2 to 3 years longer than Luke does and tell us about the wise men. Now, today in our Advent book, we read a little bit about the fire of God. We're going to come back later. I want to make some connections about that. But what you've got here is a connection of history and Bible history. Now, Jenny and I listened to something recently where it said that there's not Bible history and history. There's just history. Well, this is where everything comes into play. Because at the time when all of this is happening, wise men come from the east. Herod is upset that Jesus is born. Herod is really scared. He goes down to make sure that every kid in Bethlehem is killed. Well, Joseph has been warned in a dream, and he takes Jesus and Mary, and they run to Egypt, and they hide in Egypt until Herod dies. The reason is because at this time, there was a kind of before Jesus was born, Herod had an enemy inside Egypt, and her name was Cleopatra. Cleopatra couldn't stand Herod. She hated Herod. And she had a bunch of supporters in Egypt who, if she said it, they believed it. So Cleopatra died, but her followers were still alive in Egypt. So the reason why God sent Jesus and Joseph and Mary into Egypt, because it was the one place Herod would be afraid to go. And so that's what's happening in all of this. That's why Jesus and them move on into Egypt for a couple of years. But that's after the wise men come. Now, these wise men could have shown up as much as 2 years after Jesus was born. So you're noticing they don't come to the nativity. They don't find Jesus in a manger. They find the child, not the infant, not the newborn. They find the child in a house. And so it just kind of redoes a little bit of what we've always assumed. But this is a good chance to look at the Bible and go, okay, am I going to stick with what I think or stick with what the Bible actually says? That's an interesting piece. Now, John, what was your takeaway from this chapter?
So my takeaway is how God provides. And what I mean by that is when Herod was king, he gave Joseph a dream telling him to go to Egypt. And we've seen him provide even more than that throughout the whole Bible, and I like that.
I like that too. So throughout the whole story here, you're noticing that there's Mary and Joseph and Jesus, and there's wise men, and they're all on a path. But who directs that path? Like John said, it's always God. Now, when Matthew writes this story, I need you to understand what's going on. Remember when Herod called in all the guys to find out where the Messiah is going to be born? They said that the Messiah was going to be born in Bethlehem. That comes from a prophecy in Micah chapter number 5. And it says, "But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not the least among the rulers of Judah." So Bethlehem in Judah is a relatively insignificant little village, but it becomes a really important, significant place because that's where Jesus is from. All right, now notice this. It says, "And when Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him." So he's heard that the wise men are looking for the Messiah. When it says he was troubled, it doesn't mean he was a little worried. No. It means he's agitated, stirred up. He is angry. He is in turmoil. Why? Because his authority is being questioned. So you got a couple of things going here. You got a king who's not a real king, who's anxious about a real king who's going to take over, and they're not mixing. This is where opposition to Jesus initially begins. You also have a group of really educated theologians and Bible teachers who they knew the Bible, but they still missed Jesus. So it's possible to have a great knowledge of the scriptures, but be indifferent to nearness to God. Now, when this story goes on, I want to go back to what our Advent book talked about today. Talked about fire. how fire is refining, how fire is part of it. Well, remember, fire is a big deal in the Bible, okay? When the children of Israel came out of Egypt, they were led with a cloud by day, and that cloud protected them from the harsh sun in the day as they traveled, okay? So it gave them shade and rest. And then at night, when the cloud was gone, what led them through the wilderness at night? A pillar of fire. So a scary, dark wilderness was lit up by fire in the sky that pushed out all the darkness, and it made people who were probably really afraid of the dark, it made them okay. All right, now let me tell you this. What led the wise men to Jesus?
A star.
What are stars made out of?
Fire and gas.
Fire. All right, so Matthew wants you to know that this whole moment is supernatural. There's a moving star, there's dreams, there's angels, there's fulfillment of prophecy, there's all this stuff going on, but you've also got this presence of God leading people with a giant ball of fire up in the sky. In Exodus, it was a pillar of fire to lead them through a wilderness. In Matthew, it's a star that moves along just the way the pillar of fire did in the wilderness. It moves until the wise men get to Jesus. So when you're watching all the way through the Bible, you're finding that God has been setting up the imagery, the pictures of all that's happening, and it's leading all throughout. It's leading to Jesus. And it says this, and one of the passages it's going to have in Matthew, that it might be fulfilled, that which was spoken by the Lord through the prophets. Everything that happens in Matthew's account of Jesus' birth fulfills prophecy. That's why there's so much Old Testament going on. These wise men probably traveled a long distance for about 2 years one way, which means they had about 2 years to get home after they met Jesus. Let me just tell you this. A lot of us aren't willing to be inconvenienced for a day. These guys put their lives on hold for 2 years, and they didn't consider it a waste because they were going to meet God. As we prepare for Advent, we're walking through Advent and preparing for Christmas. Let me just tell you this. There is nothing more important than meeting with God. So as we read through Matthew, understand this whole story is about moving in rhythm with God to meet the Son. All right? Have a great day. Keep reading. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye.